Jeff Wallach is an award-winning journalist and the author of 4 books of nonfiction and nearly 1,000, or actually by this time it's more than 1,000 articles, essays, and reviews for dozens of national publications, including the New York Times, Sports Illustrated, Men's Journal, Money Magazine, Health, Men's Fitness, and many others, probably Playboy if he was around when they were in publication. At any rate, Jeff, welcome to Golf. Yeah.
Pleasure to be here.
I have to start with an apology for our tens of thousands of listeners. Jeff sent me an email. I don't know if you have a publicist, but he sent me an email asking if I was interested in interviewing him. And I said no. And I have to give you a reason why. First of all, I didn't know who you were. I should have known who you were, but you caught me at a period of time where I had been bombarded by requests from every idiot selling every piece of golf junk in the world, as well as people that had nothing to do with golf. And yours came in that batch, and I just was saying, no. And thankfully, you were gracious enough to come back to me and say, hey, you idiot, I do have a very strong golf connection. And you were right. And I'm glad you did.
Thank you. I don't think of myself as like every other idiot. I think of myself as a special idiot. So I'm glad you were paying attention.
Okay. But again, I felt really, and then when I read your credentials and I read some of your stuff, I thought, oh man, what a jerk. So I apologize.
That is a good explanation of the plight of an author these days, forced to do his own publicity and, reach out to dozens of strangers, if not hundreds of strangers, and try to get some publicity for a book that he wrote. So,
and that's actually, that's part of what I want to talk to you about, because I do want to talk about your books, but I don't want to replicate every other podcast that you've been on where you talk about your books. I want to talk about your career as a journalist and as a novelist. And for people who might be aspiring to be either one or both of those, either having to do with golf or sports or any topic. But I want to start with a post that you put on LinkedIn earlier this week, because you had been over in Dublin, and talk about that in a second. And you mentioned that you had the origins of a number of terms, including blind, drunk, dead ringer, and wake. So I was hoping that you could actually fill in the blank on those things.
Yes. Well, let's see if I can recall the way this was described to me by a gentleman at the Irish Whiskey Museum. So, blind drunk. Let's come back to that one.
Should we go to the next question?
No,
I told you this one was coming.
A blind spot on blind drunk. Okay, well, dead ringer. So the problem in the olden days was, and I've heard 2 different stories about this. One is they used to drink out of pewter mugs, particularly when they were drinking beer. And pewter has lead in it. And if you drink out of a pewter mug often enough or long enough, it has a catatonic effect. In essence, it puts you in a coma.
Does it give you sickle cell anemia?
That might be a side effect.
Okay.
At any rate, so what would happen is they would bury people, and then, depending on where they buried them, like someone might hear some scratching on the inside.
Okay.
So they took to putting a string in a hole into the coffin with a bell on the outside, so that if the person woke up and they were in the coffin, they could ring the bell.
Seriously?
So that was a dead ringer.
So did they tie the string to his hand, his or her hand? No.
That would make the most sense, because I guess, if you woke up in a coffin, you might not think to pull a string and ring a bell
or have a flashlight.
And that is also where the term wake came from, because after a while, when this had gone on too many times and they buried a live person, they decided, well, why don't we just set him out on a table for a few days and we'll sit around and drink. And if he wakes, we'll know he wasn't actually dead.
Oh, cool. Okay. Have you seen the movie Waking Ned Devine?
I have.
That's one of my favorite movies ever.
Yeah. So. And the blind drunk part is also related to whiskey, but apparently I consumed too much while I was listening to the presentation and don't remember it.
Okay, well maybe it had to do with the whiskey was lousy whiskey or rancid or something, and
Oh, yes.
made you
Very
go
good.
blind.
Very good. No, they there was a time where when they were distilling, there are two different parts of alcohol, ethanol and alcohol. Ethanol will make you go blind. And it took them a while in determining how to distill whiskey, how to separate out the ethanol. So now when you see like the copper pot stills that whiskey makers use,
Right.
what they're trying to do is boil off the ethanol so that you didn't go blind drunk.
Okay.
Thanks
Because
for that.
we have some bootleggers in our neighborhood. I always wonder what they were doing back there with those copper stills. So
Do they all have canes and, and seeing eye dogs?
maybe. At any rate, so you were in Dublin last week.
Yes.
Okay, I was there also,
Oh,
and I promise I was with Tom Coyne. He has this thing called the Coyne Cup. I don't know if you consider him a compatriot or a competitor, but he runs this Coin Cup. He's done 6 of them, where he takes a bunch of old guys over to either Scotland or Ireland, and he has this coin cup competition where it's structured loosely after the Ryder Cup, and so it's just for fun. But anyway, I was on the bus with him, and like back and forth from the hotels to the various courses, and I said, "Do you know Jeff Wallach?" He said, "Of course I know Jeff Wallach. He's a well-known journalist and novelist." I said, "Well, stupid me. I should have known that." He said, "Don't tell him I was in London because he had a book signing or a reading, and I was invited and I didn't go." Now, I wasn't supposed to tell you, but I will. His defense is this, and it's honest. He brought his whole family over on this trip. He had his parents who were in their 80s. He had his wife's parents. He had his 2 girls and a whole bunch of cousins. So any free time that he did have was already booked in advance. So that's the plausible excuse, I would
and
think.
what compensation did you receive to tell me that?
No, he said, "Don't mention I was here." He
No,
said, "Just say hi."
I saw his posts while I was there, and I reached out to him, and I think you were like a day behind me everywhere you went because I saw
Okay.
like you played at the Island Club, right?
We did.
I was at the Island Club. I think you
Oh,
played Royal Dublin.
we did.
I was at Royal Dublin.
Oh, geez.
So you may well have found a few of my golf balls in the Marrow.
The other way around. Trust me. Trust me.
But anyway, no, Tom is a great writer, and I would consider him a compatriot and a competitor for sure.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
And speaking of lost golf balls, I bought 2 dozen Kirkland balls from Costco because I had heard that they play like, Titleist Pro V1s and are half the price. I bought a bunch of them, and I left a bunch of them over there, and I was envisioning these Irish guys picking them up, saying, "Oh, what's a Kirkland ball? I never heard of that before." Anyway, they're from me. Compliments.
I may have actually found one of yours.
Okay, because I figured I knew I was going to lose a lot in the gorse and all that other shit they have over there. So
Yeah, I would say my greatest accomplishment for the week was I played one of the courses. It wasn't the Island. I think it was Royal Dublin with the same golf ball for 18 holes.
Wow. But Royal Dublin was very playable, rough. It was kind of wispy grass. You could find your ball and you could hit out of it. Some of the other courses we played, like Portmarnock, and then we played the European Club, it was like full of these spiked bushes that if you went, you were going to like lose a limb, and you'd never reach in to get it.
Right.
That wasn't by accident. Anyway, let's get to the interview. So now that I've apologized for me and for Tom Coyne, I like to start with backstories because I've never heard you talk about, where you grew up, your family, your schooling, what made you want to become a writer. Was it a purposeful, or did you have no other job prospects?
Well, I mean, I've certainly proven myself unhireable, but that came later.
Okay.
I started out pretty early on, probably around the 7th grade. I had a teacher who, I'm sure she regretted it later, but she was very encouraging when I was writing some short stories. And so from there, in high school, I worked on the literary magazine. In college, I studied English. Then I went into the least practical graduate program ever designed, which was a master's in creative writing, and I was setting out to be a fiction writer, and then got out of that program after 2 years with no marketable skills of any kind.
I know
And so
that.
I took a 35-year detour and became a journalist because I still wanted to make my living writing, and fiction writing did not seem like the best ticket at that time, or at any other time for that matter. So, so I became a journalist out of self-defense, and that was a phenomenal career. I mean, I was in it at a time where, there were actual magazines printed on paper with ink. And
isn't it a good thing we have video, because I could see you do the air quotes?
Yeah, I would hate to miss that. And this was so in those days, as I'm sure you know, there were gatekeepers, aka editors, and unless you had some skills or some expertise or some other background recommending you, you couldn't publish, because if you were a knucklehead and didn't know how to spell, or you were a crazy person, editors were there to screen the rest of the world from whatever you were trying to tell them. And now in the internet era, anybody with a laptop living in their parents' basement with a fish tank is a journalist, because there are no gatekeepers. There are no barriers to entry anymore. Anyone can publish anything at any time. And what that's done to people like me is it's cheapened the content that I produce, which, I've spent a lifetime learning how to do, hopefully well, and I have credentials, and I research my subjects and check my facts, things that are no longer required to be published. So
I can see I've hit a raw nerve there, Jeff.
Yes.
You're up on your soapbox, but I want to go back, because you went way too fast on your life story. So, where did you grow up? What did your parents do? Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah. So I grew up on Long Island, outside of Manhattan in New York.
What town on Long Island?
It was called the Five Towns. Mine was North Woodmere.
Okay.
Sort of a middle class to affluent Jewish suburb of New York, where most of the parents took the train into the city for white collar jobs. My family business was the jewelry business, which my grandfather started on the Bowery, New York's Lower East Side, in 1910.
Wow.
My father and his brother took that over. My brother's now the third generation. I got as far away from it as I possibly could.
Okay. Well, it's up at the 40s now, right? They moved up from the Bowery, or the 50s.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
The 50s. Yeah.
Off of Fifth Avenue, the jewelry district, 47th Street mostly.
Okay. So you had one brother?
I have one brother. Yeah.
One brother. Okay. What made you go? So you're in 7th grade. Where'd you go to high school?
I went to George W. Hewlett High School.
Okay. Was that the kids mostly college bound there?
Yes,
school?
Very much so. Probably upwards of 80 or 90%.
Okay. And you went to Brown?
I did my graduate work at Brown. I did my undergrad 4 years at Vassar College.
Oh, at Vassar. Okay.
Yeah.
Had they just turned co-ed? Wasn't the male to female ratio like 90 to 10 or something, or the female to male?
Let's just say it was good.
Did that factor in your selection decision?
I don't think it factored into my decision, but I sure was happy about it when I got there.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't want to tell any stories about that, do you?
Well, I mean, I just went back from my 40th reunion, and some of us were reflecting on the fact that, for one thing, most of us could not get into the college today.
Or afford to.
The requirements, or afford to, but the requirements are so high. And one of the factors that got some of us in at the time was they were starting their first men's sports teams. And I played soccer in high school, and they were starting a soccer team. And so, I mean, that's not what got me in, but I think it probably helped. They were looking for men who played sports.
Okay.
And I happened to be one at the right time.
No co-ed wrestling or anything like that.
Not officially.
Okay.
That's a whole different question.
Okay. So then, did you go to Brown right after you left, graduated?
I did.
That was a master's degree in writing?
In fiction writing.
Fiction writing. I think Tom Coyne did the same thing at Notre Dame, didn't he?
Oh, I didn't know that.
He did. And actually, the book he wrote as part of his master's thesis was, I forget the title of it, was made into a movie with Gary Sinise.
Really?
Yeah. So what you didn't have that? You didn't get that?
No. Now Tom is more of a competitor than a compatriot.
Yeah, that was pretty heady stuff right out of graduate school for him. So I don't want to feel like a failure. I just thought.
No, I've had a pretty good run myself, but I will say, the odds of something like that happening are astronomical. So good for him, and I admire anybody who's got, first of all, someone who creates has my admiration from the beginning, whether it's a podcast or a novel or, you're making ashtrays. I mean, it doesn't matter. Or license plates for that matter. Right. Just the whole idea that there's very little promise of remuneration in the creative arts.
Yeah.
So anybody who does it at all, even without being rewarded, has my respect. But somebody who's successful, I mean, that's really an accomplishment.
Yeah. So you leave Brown, you really have no portfolio of printed works. How do you get your first assignment? And that's a question that I'm asking it because it still applies today. How does somebody with no experience join the big leagues?
Yeah, and I love to tell this story because not long after Brown, I moved to Portland, Oregon, where I live now. And I was trying to start a freelance career. And so in Portland at the time, there were basically, 4 or 5 outlets that you could write for. I contacted all of them to try to get, even the smallest assignments. And we had a free paper at the time that was very sort of business oriented, that you could pick up in a box on the streets of downtown, in the business district. And I pitched a couple stories to this magazine. I got a call back from the editor, and she said, "We're looking for somebody to write a column about office life." Now, the one thing I knew, even at that age, at about 23, was I was not headed to work in an office. I'm incompatible. I don't like people. I don't get along with others. All the reasons not to. But she offered me $25 a week, which this was my first paying gig, and I'm like, I'm in. So essentially, my first job as a journalist was actually as a fiction writer.
That's true.
Because every week I made up a story about something that happened in the office that I didn't work in.
Did you talk to people as sources that did work in offices just for
Sometimes
ideas?
I did, yeah. And sometimes I just wrote about my own experience, even though I hadn't actually had it.
Okay. So how did you make the transition from office fiction to bona fide journalism?
Yeah. So, I mean, I had some inroads with the other papers in Portland. We had the Oregonian here, which is the state paper of record. And it probably had, I don't know, 500,000 or 1 million subscribers back then. But as a freelancer, there were very few opportunities. And so I headed back to New York and spent 5 years in Manhattan. I started writing very, very short pieces for some pretty big magazines. They have what in those days they called the front of the book section, where there'd be roundups of, new spas or restaurants, or I did work for like Popular Science magazine, and every month they had a section about like 6 new inventions, and this could be crazy stuff.
Right.
But the stories were 100 words or 200 words, and that's how you start to build a career. And after you have 20 or 30 clips of these types of stories, now you go back to your editors and say, okay, well, these worked out well. You're still hiring me. How about a 500-word feature? And then you'd go to other magazines and say, hey, I've got all these clips. Let me do a 200-word piece for you. And, you just kind of build the blocks piece by piece until it turned into a career where, luckily at the height of my career, I mean, I was writing 2,500, 3,000 word feature stories for some very big, very good magazines.
Yeah. Were you pitching your own story topics to editors, or were they?
Yes, that's the thing people don't understand about freelancing is, I mean, the fact that you're a good writer is, the baseline requirement. But
Yeah.
what an editor really wants from a freelancer is you need to bring them ideas that nobody else has brought them. And so that's your real value. So essentially, being a freelance journalist is a sales job. And in my case, I sold about, I would say, an average of one story a week for 3.5 decades.
Wow.
I mean, that was the goal, to sell 50 stories a year, one a week.
That was your goal, your
That
personal
was my goal, to really make a living at it.
Yeah. You probably had a lot of ideas that you thought were great that an editor spit on for any reason, stupid or otherwise. How did you deal with that? Did you just take it to another book, or?
Yeah, you change the idea. I mean, the goal here was do as little work up front as you could to sell the story. You do a little bit of research because you need to sound like an expert in whatever it is you're planning to become an expert in to write the story.
Yeah.
But you want the editor to think you already know everything about it. So you do your research. And I would send, an average pitch letter for me, I'd send somewhere between 3 and 5 ideas to an editor.
Oh, really? Okay.
With the idea that if he took one, that was a pretty good track record. Okay. And so you're just constantly walking down the street. You'd see somebody do something. You'd be like, I know I could write a story about that for this magazine. I had a wide range of, I did everything from, I wrote for 17 magazine. I wrote for Popular Science, Sports Illustrated, a bunch of golf magazines, Men's Fitness, just like whenever I saw an idea, I tried to figure out what publication might be interested in this.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a sign on my desk. We're actually in similar businesses because I'm always getting my nose bruised. But I have a sign on my desk that I've had for years. That says, "He who rides the tiger cannot get off." And it sounds like you were on that kind of same trip, in that you were responsible for your own success or lack of success.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you couldn't stop.
But I think, not to take that metaphor too far, but basically now the tiger is dead. And there's no more riding.
You think so?
As I knew it. Yes.
During that period in your life, what was going on writing technology-wise? Was the internet around, or were you typing on carbon paper and typewriter and whiteout?
Yeah, that's where I started for sure. An electric typewriter was the cutting edge technology, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then I think I had my first computer, not my own, but wrote on a computer in graduate school at Brown. They had a system, and we had to compete for computer time, and the people in the writing program were not really high priorities, so we would end up with slots at 11, 12, 1 in the morning, where you could get 3 hours of computer time.
Yeah.
And then that was fine. And then, I got my first personal computer, I don't know, in maybe 1985, 1986, an Apple IIe computer. The Mac had just come out, and I was like, that's not going to catch on.
Yeah.
So
mine was a Tandy Radio Shack, a Trash 80, and they'd send me patches every week that I didn't know how to install.
Right.
Anyway, it's the dark ages.
So we were very lucky. Like the notion that anybody could have ever written a novel without the internet is astounding to me when I see how much I rely on it for information, for fact checking, just for the physical part of writing. And that was all great, but then the internet came along and ruined everything.
Okay. What's the word for, was it troglodyte? What's the name for people that hate technology? Or
yeah, that would be a good one.
Okay. But when you were pitching stories, Jeff, because there was no email, right? There's no internet. Did you have to mail a physical letter or actually knock on a door to pitch your stories?
At the beginning, yes, letters, query letters, which were actual letters.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, that seems so long ago, I can hardly remember it.
Okay.
And then obviously, once you had a personal computer, you know, all these magazines were wired up. And so you started to send email. And that was, you know, that saved a lot of time and money, right?
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of aspects of the internet that, you know, were obviously helpful. I'm facetious somewhat, but I mean, it did ruin freelance magazine work for a lot of people. So I'm only partly bitter.
Well, are you paint a pretty pessimistic picture for somebody who's an aspiring journalist? I mean, how do they survive today? I mean, you made a living, right? I mean,
yeah, and I got out of this mostly about 6 years ago because it was becoming too hard to make a living. So two things happened. One, maybe at the height of my career, a magazine paid me $4 a word for a story.
Do the math for me. Do the math. What's the total?
So if you wrote a 2,000 word story, you know, you might have gotten $700,000 or
$800,000. That's $800,000, right?
800,000. Yeah. See, you would have been my kind of editor. You could have sent me the check, and we all would have been fine.
What is that? I interrupted you. Is it $800 or $8,000?
It would have been $8,000 for a 2,000 word story.
All right, that's pretty decent payday.
Maybe
right?
It would take a couple of weeks to write, and
Okay.
maybe there would be a trip involved and some expenses. So it's not a path to wealth. Let me just put it that way. But by the end of my career, so one effect of the internet was people had a shorter attention span. So the stories were no longer 2,000 words. They were 600 words.
Yeah.
And the pay was no longer $4 a word. It was 50 cents a word.
Okay.
And there were so many people competing for this work that it became impossible to make a living at it. And so, you know, my advice to people who are going into this field would be you need to hitch your wagon to a publication and probably have a staff job as opposed to trying to make a go as a freelancer. Now, this whole new field of influencing, you know, is attracting a lot of people. I mean, if you thought I was on a rant about publishing, we should probably not talk about influencers at all, but that is not really journalism. That's, you know, taking a photo of yourself in a lot of different settings.
Well,
So,
one alternative to success in journalism these days is either have a rich spouse or a spouse with a nice income, or, as I see from your resume, it says Wallach has also worked as a real estate developer in Portland, Oregon, buying, renovating, and managing a portfolio worth over $15 million. Talk about that.
that is true. Let's be clear, though, that I manage it. I don't own it. So I own some of it.
Okay.
But of that $15 million, you know, it's not like I got rich personally doing this and I'm you know, a land baron. I mean, what happened was when I met my wife, I was 39 or 40 years old. And I had just bought a house, which I had always thought would be completely out of my reach, you know, given that I worked as a freelance journalist. And I had some corporate gigs and, you know, writing for other places that paid me a little bit of money. And I bought this house. And I was like, wow, you know, this is a mark of success, something I never thought I'd do. Then I met my wife. We decided to get married. She had also just bought a house. Hers was better than mine. By better, I mean she had a duplex that she was sharing with a business partner. And so for two people who both worked at home, this duplex made sense. We could put our offices on one floor and live on the other floor. So we decided we would live in her house, not mine. And I thought, well, I'm so proud that I was able to buy this house. I'm emotionally attached to it. I wonder, could I rent it out and be a landlord? And so I bought a bunch of books about managing real estate. And I did all the stuff you're supposed to do and went to classes and talked to people at the city. and I rented out my house, and I was making $100 a month. Like, I thought, this is the greatest thing ever. They're paying my mortgage, and I get $100 a month. So my wife and I had a little bit of cash. We bought a second rental house. Now we were making $200 a month. Like,
Wow.
oh my God, we're like zillionaires.
Yeah, right.
But we were out of money. But this was back in around 2003 in Portland, Oregon, when if you went to a party, all anybody talked about was real estate.
Yeah.
I mean, it was booming. And so we had a lot of friends who had made better career choices, like they were doctors and lawyers or had actual jobs where they got a check every 2 weeks. So I pitched a business proposal to a bunch of my friends that if they all threw some money into a pot, I would buy something. I would oversee the renovation of it. I would manage it as a long-term rental. And I convinced some friends to do this. And then that was very successful. And so I did more and more of it until I built, over 20 years, a pretty big portfolio.
That's cool. So really your basic skill, you're a salesman.
I'm an entrepreneur. I prefer that term to salesman. Salesman makes it sound like I'm going to knock on your door with a vacuum cleaner.
Well, okay. If you want to denigrate the sales profession, but I hear you. I hear you. So you probably ran into the same problem I did when I go to a banker and you're in business for yourself and they say, oh, so you don't have any steady source of income, do you? They look at you like a deadbeat. And I always want to say to them, hey, buddy, you know what? You're like a phone call away from having your boss call you and saying, we don't need you anymore. And what are you going to do? I said, at least I know how to go get more work.
That's
you probably don't. You don't want to
right.
hear that because they won't give you the mortgage if you say that to them.
Well, I mean, I got into this business at a time when, if you had $5 in your wallet and you showed it to a mortgage broker, you could get a loan. They had something for you. I mean, this was before the crash. I mean, partly it was responsible for the crash because a lot of people bought things they couldn't afford. But if you were buying things that made more money than they cost, and you were doing it with borrowed money, that was a pretty good formula for success.
Yeah. So is your general advice, if you're an aspiring journalist in this day and age, to try to find some second source of income to kind of keep you afloat while you...
I think if you were a journalist, then you're probably getting a paycheck. If you were a poet or a playwright or a fiction writer, I would say,
right,
you're probably going to need to do something else. Yeah.
Okay. Before we leave your journalism career and move on to your novelist career, you went on a lot of interesting assignments. From what I've read in this book and other places, you did a lot of interesting things on writing assignments, right? And you played a lot of golf in interesting courses.
Yeah, I was very, very lucky in my career that, for me, money was not the goal. The goal was to live a varied and interesting life. And as a freelancer, I mean, I really had that opportunity. I got sent all over the world on different types of assignments. I mean, I interviewed athletes and Nobel Prize winning scientists and writers that I admired. And so since money wasn't the object, that was my reward. I got to do a lot of stuff that people would love to do. Yeah.
Did you get to rub shoulders with any well-known golfers during that?
I did. For me, golf is more interesting as from the participatory or the travel side than it is from the tour side. So, I mean, I've met a lot of the, famous players and architects over the years, and I'm always happy to be in their company. They're interesting people generally. But that wasn't the part of the game that I focused on.
Okay. Talk a little bit about your golfing career. When did you start to play? And
yeah, I must have started 10 or 12 years old. That was my dad's thing. One of the few things we had in common, which I think is true for a lot of men. So that was a way for us to connect. So I grew up playing. When I was a kid, we'd go to someone's mother would drop us off at the Muni, And like
Right.
8 hours later, someone else's mother would come pick us up, and we just keep going around and around
Right.
and playing as many holes as we could. And then when I was at Vassar, we had a golf course on the campus, a 9-hole course that you
Cool.
got to play as many holes as you could for 50 cents. So I had a group of friends, and we'd go out in the morning before class and play as many as we could, and then we'd go through our day. And at the end of the day, we'd go back out and play some more holes.
Okay.
So I mean, I've always loved the sport, and then I was lucky enough to kind of make part of my career in it.
Yeah. Yeah. This book, which I have read most of, and I when I sent my apology letter for rejecting you the first time as a guest, I was just really impressed with you as a writer, but I was also intrigued with your connection with Zen, and I think of Caddyshack, I think of Zen golf, but I mean you treat it really seriously. I mean you've made a case for the connection between Zen living and the game of golf. I was going to read a passage just to give people an example of what I thought was, representative of that point of view. But maybe you could just, I mean, have you changed? This book was written, what, 15 years ago?
No, more than that, 1996.
Oh, I thought it was, 95, 96. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's been
25 years ago, something like that.
Okay. Does this continue to sell? Is it still in the shelf?
In a very small way.
Okay.
I've almost earned back the advance that they paid me in 1996.
Okay. I want to talk about that in a minute, about advances and stuff on novels. But can you talk a little bit about this? Because some of it I got and connected. Some of it was I'm not smart enough to understand in terms of.
Well, so the thing about the book is that Zen is a way of seeing the world, and any activity that you pursue could be a vehicle for understanding the world in that way. So, the ancient Zen monks, one of the things they did was archery, right? Or martial arts, or flower arranging. And all of these things were a vehicle to teach this underlying philosophy. And so golf, for me, it just happened to be golf. It could have been something else if I was, I don't know what, a Gaelic football player. Maybe that would have been the sport that I pursued to understand some of this stuff. But golf in particular, because it's a solitary sport, there's nobody defending you, so it's just you and the action.
Yeah.
Lends itself to some of this inward exploration and application to the world outside you.
Were you into Zen and Zen thinking before you started writing? I mean, where's the connection with golf? How did that happen?
I read a lot about it. I wasn't a student per se in terms of working with a master, but I read a lot of books about it, and I was intrigued by this idea that some sort of higher level of consciousness could be achieved through an activity. And for me, golf seemed like it lent itself to that more than most other activities.
Yeah. Does it still influence your life and your thinking, or have you kind of left that behind you?
That's a good question. I think I'm still open to the possibilities of these moments of clarity, these moments where things connect in a way that maybe the Zen masters were getting at was enlightenment. So I think I'm still interested in that happening, and how do you make that happen more often? We all have those moments, but the idea would be, how can we live in moments like that more often? Yeah.
Before I leave this book, Jeff, I have to ask you a question about one thing that you mentioned. You said you had a friend. You said, one of my closest friends, I can't mention his name because his wife would kill me if she knew this, has been conducting a small experiment with their baby. The results probably won't be conclusive for another 5 or 10 years, but sometimes you have to be patient in the name of science. Now, some time has elapsed. So you say it's a very simple experiment. The baby has just entered the stage where he eats a lot of fruit. That means a lot of diapers, cleanage. You didn't write that. I put that in there. He's absolutely captivated by fruit. And when my friend is in charge of feeding, every time he gives the baby half of a peeled grape, he whispers apple. So do you know the outcome of that mind screwing?
No, but that baby is like 25 years old now. So I'm going to check back. So maybe that'll be a reason for you to have me on another show next year.
Maybe. So you never followed through on your own.
I didn't really follow it up. No.
Okay.
I suspect my friend may have given in to pressure and come to think that wasn't a great idea, but I don't know that for a fact. Okay,
he got caught. And the other thing that I thought was funny, because it reminded me of something that happened to me. You're talking about you were at the Innisbrook Golf Institute in Florida, and it didn't seem like you were taking your lessons seriously, or at least you're being very casual about it, which is not acceptable behavior. And I have to tell you a story. A friend of mine who's no longer with us, he went down to Davis Love III's father, who I call Davis Love the Turd. But at any rate, his father, who died in a plane crash, had a golf school in Florida. So he had a long line, about 20 guys, and he would go to each one of them, give them some direction, and then walk away, maybe not come back for a half hour or so. And he went up to my friend and he gave him some instruction, like tuck your arm in on your downswing, tuck your arm in. So, and then he went away, and then he came back. And you have to understand, my friend was a pediatric dentist. He was a very gentle person and never used foul language. So Davis Love comes up to him and starts screaming at him and saying, "I told you to tuck your arm, and I told you to tuck your arm." And my friend turns to him and he goes, "Mr. Love, with all respect," he said, "if I could fix my swing in 20 minutes, I wouldn't be at your fucking golf school." And he said Davis Love walked away and never came back. He sent one of his flunkies to fix his swing.
Yeah.
At any rate, I did.
Instruction's a whole nother subject.
Yes, it is. And I have a lesson, because I played so poorly in Ireland this past week. I have a lesson scheduled for Saturday, because I was booking everything. At any rate, I recommend reading this book very strongly. It's a great read. It has a lot of funny and interesting stories in it, and a lot of insights. And if you're interested in Zen, good book to read. So I'm just looking at the clock here because I don't want to kill your whole day. Just a couple other questions. I'm looking at my list here. Were you able, when you were a journalist, were you able to handle multiple assignments, or could you only take one at a time?
No. There was always multiple assignments.
Okay.
Yeah. You were working on 4 or 5 different things. You were pitching 3 stories and responding to editors on another one and writing one. And then you were on a trip doing the research. So yeah, they always overlapped.
Okay. It's not the glamorous life that people think, right? Being a freelance journalist.
It is and it isn't. But my friends have this idea that I just, for the last 30 years have been flying around the world playing golf, right? And like somebody picks up my dinner check and somebody drives me to the airport. And yes, all of that is true. But remember that at the end of the day, most of my career, I made $35,000 a year and worked 7 days a week and nights, and put in a lot of hours that were not the hours I was on these trips enjoying myself. So I'm not complaining. I'm just saying it looks better from the outside than it sometimes does from the inside.
Yeah. So tell your friends to shut up. Walk a mile in my shoes, right? Right. So I keep threatening to leave this topic, but when you were overdoing your golf coverage, is there any course that stuck out or that you remember or consider to be the best course you played, or one that you recommend to people that say, "Hey, I'm going to Ireland. What course or
Yeah. Well, in fact, I'm just finishing up a magazine story about the trip, and my number one piece of advice to people is do not miss the courses that you've never heard of.
Yeah.
Because some of I've played a lot of the trophy courses, and I'm very happy to have been at Ballybunion and Lahinch and Waterville. They're awesome, and they're all that you've heard and read about. But some of my best experiences have been places like, we just played a course called Northwest Links, which I had never heard of. A small club in the middle of the country. We did not see any other Americans there. It was all locals.
Good.
You went to the bar afterwards, and it was not full of like guys with their hats pulled down, going over their scorecards. It was local people drinking a Guinness and laughing, and so I think if you go on one of these trips that only covers the trophy courses, you miss part of the point of the trip, which is to see what's golf like in another country for the people who live here. And one of the things that's so remarkable is that even the smallest towns will have some beautiful links course that costs the locals, €500 to join for the year. And the game is accessible to everyone. And kids play, and old ladies play, and men play. And it's a community sport. It's not the exclusive kind of private club thing that we've created here in the States. And so part of going over to someplace like Ireland is to see, wow, this is what the game could really be about connecting people of, various backgrounds and incomes and everything else.
Yeah, yeah. I also find that unless it's some kid, who's still in high school, talking to the caddies, because a lot of the caddies are older guys.
Yeah.
You get a lot of great stories, and you just ask some questions about their life. And I think that's part of the fun of playing over there.
Yeah, the caddies are, they're kind of the Zen masters of golf.
Yeah, exactly.
The wisdom that they have, but not just the wisdom that they have, but their subtle way of expressing it is a lesson that, carries a lot of weight in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, they are subtle. Like the time I played at County Down, and I had the ball up against a 6-foot-high bunker, and I said, "What should I do?" And the caddy said, "Oh, just smash the shit out of it, laddie." That was pretty subtle. At any rate. Okay, so you're not going to give us a favorite course, but
this Northwest Links that I played was, kind of a quiet discovery, and then I played Port Stewart up in the north.
Yeah,
the second time, and that just blew me away.
A lot of people don't go up north,
right?
So let's talk about your transition to Novelist. You'd mentioned that the economics of journalism were getting tougher, which was a factor. Were you just tired of the routine, having to pitch and sell and pitch and sell? And
I was tired of the routine, and it had become so much more difficult for me to find enough work that I realized, I couldn't make enough money at this anymore, and I couldn't really get enough assignments to keep myself busy. I had luckily created some wealth with my real estate, and I realized, I don't have to do this anymore. I'm going to give it up before it gives me up and go back to writing fiction, which is what I had hoped to do my whole life anyway. And so I basically now have one journalism gig left, which is a regular gig for Business Traveler magazine. And other than that, I don't pitch anything. I'm not really interested in taking on assignments. I'm spending my time writing fiction, which is like my first love in writing.
Okay. So you didn't do it cold turkey. You've kind of, you kept taking some assignments or some select assignments while you.
Okay. Yeah, but they got, they paid less and became harder to find. And I could see where this was headed.
Yeah. So give me the chronology of which book did you write first? Was it the Zen Lessons Beyond the Fairway? Was this the first book you wrote?
That was my first book ever. Yes.
Okay. And this was in 1995.
Yeah.
1995. But it was this, at this point in time, this was in your mind part of the transition, or did you just do this as a sideline?
No, that was essentially a work of journalism.
Yeah, because it is kind of a compendium of different stories, right?
Yeah, most of the stuff is true.
Is what?
Most of it's true.
Yeah, most of it's true.
I won't tell you which parts aren't.
Okay. But then what your next book was? Which one? Mr. Wizard?
Well, no, there were 4 more before Mr. Wizard.
Really? But your bio says you've only written 4 books of nonfiction.
Well, it was 5 books of nonfiction and then the 2 novels, so 7 altogether. So I followed Beyond the Fairway with a book about a summer I spent working as a whitewater river guide in Idaho.
And that actually happened, right?
That did actually happen. Yeah, I worked as a guide for about 15 years in the summers.
Why did you tell me that when I asked you about your background? I want to ask you about that.
I forgot. I don't know.
Oh, I forgot. Okay.
It seems like a piece that doesn't fit with all the other pieces. At any rate.
But it may have been influence of your Zen outlook, right? You're out there.
Yeah, maybe so. And there's a river trip in one of the novels. So, I mean, that experience did not go unmined, you know.
Okay.
But that, you know, that's a big aside, and that would be a whole different conversation. But so the second book was about a season working on the River of No Return in Idaho.
What's that called? What's that book called?
It's called, what is it called? What the River Says.
Okay.
Which is a line that was borrowed from a William Stafford poem. He was like the poet laureate of Oregon. And he wrote a poem called What the River Says, which
states have poet laureates? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No. Every state does?
I don't know.
I'm not sure New Jersey knows what poetry is.
Yeah. Hard to say.
Okay. Is that book still for sale? Could I find that on Amazon? Or
you could probably find a used copy.
A used copy.
Yeah, it's not public. That went out of print many, many years ago.
Okay. So it's a collector's item.
You could call it that.
Okay. So then what'd you write?
And then I wrote 3 more golf books. One was a club history, which is not available commercially. The Eugene Country Club here in Oregon had its 100-year anniversary in 1999. So I wrote a club history for them.
Okay.
And then I had 2 other collections. One was called Driven to Extremes. And the other was sort of a Northwest golf guidebook that I did for a small publisher out of Seattle.
Okay. You were paid for all these, right?
I was, yeah.
Okay.
Not a lot, but yes.
Okay. In this book, I learned more about golf balls than I ever wanted to know. This chapter in there, it's like goes on forever. It's like, I was interesting, but you lost me. I was on a plane. I think I fell asleep.
Yeah. Here's the one takeaway from that chapter, and it's funny that you mentioned that because this came up recently in a conversation. Someone said, you know, how many golf balls do you think they make every year? And I said, I could tell you how many they make. It's 4 billion, and that's with a B. And I'm not exaggerating. You could look this up. They make 4 billion golf balls every year. So wouldn't you think that like everywhere you went, driving down the highway, you'd see piles of golf balls? You know, you go to the forest, you'd see golf. I mean, where are all these billions of golf balls? They're all like out in the grass somewhere where you and I lost them.
I think they sent them to cruise ships and they hit them off the rear deck. And
yeah,
you mentioned that, didn't you? Because you had like the life of a golf ball and where it went. And some guy, I thought that was kind of cute. I enjoyed that. Because I was kind of zen.
I still find that like absolutely astounding.
Yeah. But is that all manufacturers combined?
That's all manufacturers combined. I went to I'm trying to remember which factory I went to in Chicopee, Massachusetts.
Titleist. Yeah.
They make, at that time, they were making about $1 billion a year. Wow. And this was 20-something years ago.
Wow.
So
I wonder how many balls Costco makes. I know I left a lot of them over there.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, those balls are probably being made by one of the other big manufacturers.
Yeah, and they're flawed or something, and you're like,
or no, they're just branded. They're just branded for Costco.
I interviewed the head of golfballs.com, and he told me he had started his business actually by selling used golf balls first, and then transitioned to new golf balls. But Do you ever buy used golf balls?
If there's a kid with a bag of golf balls on a course that I'm playing, and he's got a handwritten sign, I always buy them.
Okay, but that's charity. You don't play it, do you?
Yeah, no, I mean,
Okay.
I play whatever's in my bag.
Okay.
I used to get all my gear for free, and now I don't. So I'm willing to play whatever comes my way.
Got it. I want to ask more questions about Novelist. Again, I don't want to keep you all day, but
you know what? I've got another hour before I have to be anywhere. So you just keep firing questions.
Okay. So I will tell you that if I find a ball in the woods or anywhere, I won't play it because I think it has bad mojo on it, because somebody has hit it poorly for it to be there, and I'm afraid I might catch the disease, which is.
So you're blaming the ball.
Well, yeah. No, that
Think
ball.
of it this way: you could rescue this ball that ended up with a bad partner.
No, I'm not that charitable.
Who mistreated it and hit it in the woods, and you could be the golf ball's hero.
Okay, that's true. At any rate, so now you're a novelist. The two series, the fiction books that you've written, Mr. Wizard first, right?
Yeah.
And then this follow-up book, everyone here is from somewhere else. But I have to read Mr. Wizard first.
You should. Everyone should.
So my question is, did the idea were you in search of an idea to write a fiction book, or did the idea come to you and then you said, okay, that I'm going to write a fiction book about this? And you can talk a little bit about what the concept is, because for those that haven't read it.
That's a good question. So if I remember right, and my memory is not always entirely reliable, I was already working on something else, on a piece of fiction. And I was writing some short stories. And so I had a short story about two brothers who connected to each other through a card trick. And the name of the card trick is Mr. Wizard.
Okay.
And as a short story writer, I had been working on this short story for probably 20 years. Not every day, but
right.
I'd work on it for a couple of weeks. I'd get it to a point where I thought it was good. I'd send it out to a magazine. I often got nice responses in when they were rejecting the story. People would say, I really like this, or whatever. So I always kept working on the story. And then when I sort of retired from journalism, I thought, it's a really good story. I'm going to pick it up again. And so the card trick and the brothers are still there, but that's all that remains from the original story. And that turned into the novel.
Okay. I've heard enough of your podcast that I kind of know the whole storyline, which is interesting. Do you want to just give us?
Yeah, I'll give you a quick explanation. Is that so? Two brothers who grow up with a single mom on Long Island, and believe that their Jewish father died in the Vietnam War. And then fast forward to one of the brothers is in his 50s. His mother has dementia. He's visiting her in the home where she is, and she offhandedly says to him, you should be careful about your drinking, being half Irish. And it's like, what? And he thinks, is this dementia, or is she accidentally revealing something, or is she purposely giving him a clue? So he goes and has a DNA test done, and it turns out that, in fact, he's half Irish. So he calls his brother, and they talk about this and how their mother was always hiding things from them when they were growing up, and using misdirection, which is key to the card trick Mr. Wizard that the book is named after. Anyway, the brother calls back, the first brother, a few weeks later, and he says, hey, I got some interesting news. I took the test too, and I'm half Jewish just like you are, but the other half is not Irish. And so now the brothers know, first of all, that whoever their mother told them was their father was either not their father or not who she said he was. Okay. And so the rest of the book is sort of a DNA treasure hunt where the two brothers are trying to find out, where they came from and what that means to them.
Okay. How long did it take you to write that book?
I banged out the first draft in about 6 months and then spent about another year and a half revising it.
That's what I'm going to ask you. How much time you spend writing versus rewriting?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about your writing discipline. I heard you say in another podcast that anybody can write a novel. They just don't have the discipline to sit down and get it out. I happen to think there's probably some talent involved, which you appear to have, but that was very generous of you to say that.
There might be some talent and there might be some training, but it also depends on what your goal is, right? So if your goal is to publish and win awards and make money, that's one thing. If your goal is to write a novel because you want to write a novel, that's my idea that anyone can do it. I mean, I have a friend who I greatly admire who had a corporate job his whole life, and he just retired at 63 or 64, and he said, I'm gonna write a novel. And everyone I've ever met has told me I've got a great novel in me. I'm just waiting for the time to write it. And my friend came back to me a year later with 100 pages. And he said, I've been working on this for a whole year. And I mean, he had no training. He never wrote at his job. He had more of a technical job. But he sat down and he did the work. And I really admire that. And I admire the people who are, toiling away at family histories. Yeah. I mean, anybody can write a book. Whether it's going to be published and make money, I can't answer. But so when people come up to me after a reading or an event that I do, and they're like, oh, I have a great idea for a novel, like as if here we are, two novelists standing next to each other. I always say, oh, that's great. How many pages have you written? Oh, I haven't started it yet. Yeah, right. Well, okay. So, I mean, I love the idea of encouraging people who may not ever get published to write books because it's fun. It's a discipline. It's, the rewards are not the rewards that you think they are by seeing your book in a bookstore. The reward is in the process.
Yeah. But you write books to make money as well, right? I mean, or primarily.
Well, not anymore. I mean, these novels were not written to make money. They were written with the hope that they might make money, but that wasn't their goal.
So I thought that the process was you write a sample chapter and an outline, you send it to a publisher and say, any interest? And if they say yes, they give you an advance. It doesn't work like that?
That would be a nonfiction book.
Oh, that's just nonfiction.
But a novel, an agent or an editor will want to know the whole thing is finished. And they'll want to, they might ask to see 50 pages or 100 pages. Okay. But if they write back and say they like that 100 pages, they're not going to wait 2 years. They assume the only reason you're contacting them is because the book's done.
Okay.
So you write the novel without nobody, when I finished the novel, then the real hard work began trying to find a publisher.
Okay. So it's on spec, totally on spec.
Totally on spec. And that's the only reason to ever do it. I mean, unless, I don't know, I'm sure there are exceptions of people who come out of great writing programs and they have the right contacts and, someone reads a chapter and goes, we want to buy this. But yeah, that would be pretty unusual.
So you don't have an agent to shop your novels around once they're completed?
I don't. I mean, I've had 4 agents in my career. And so I assumed when I finished the novel that I wouldn't have any problem getting another agent because I had an agent for every one of my nonfiction books. Mm-hmm. And the industry has changed so much that, I mean, I've got credentials, right? I have a degree in writing for whatever that's worth. I've written for the New York Times. I made my living for 35 years as a writer. So even if I'm a lousy fiction writer, I would think if you were an agent, you would at least maybe be willing to take a look. I mean, I sent out something like 130 letters to agents, and I would say 100 of them never even responded. I mean, nothing, not even like a form letter like you used to get in the old days. Because my book's not a it's never going to be a blockbuster. It's not going to sell 500,000 copies. It's a small literary novel that would have, I mean, it's had a nice audience. It's done well for what it is. But since an agent makes their money by taking 15% of whatever you make, if you make $10,000 on a book, it's not worth the agent, spending 5 hours reading it.
Yeah.
So when I got to the end of that process, I was considering self-publishing it. And I had a friend in my writing group who said, there's a lot of small publishers who are looking for quality, what they call literary fiction. Mm-hmm. There's no money in it, but you'll probably find somebody who wants to publish the book. And that's what I did. After all of that, I sent it out to about 30 of these small presses. And I got 3 offers pretty quickly, and then had to retract the submissions on all the other ones when I accepted one of those offers. So I might have had even more.
Do you burn your bridge with those ones where you retract?
No, I mean, they get it. They know you've sent it to several places. You send them a letter and say, look, I haven't heard from you. I took another offer, so please don't bother reading this. I think, they appreciate that you're a professional, and they don't get to the point where it finally comes up in their pile and then they read the whole thing and then you've already sold the book somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I'm always very careful with other people's time.
Okay. So you get a publisher, and then you have to promote the book yourself, right? I mean, the publisher might do some rudimentary stuff, I
mean, they did everything that I expected them to do and that they said they were going to do. But yes, in this day and age, unless you're published by a very large publisher, you're out beating the streets, doing everything you can to get reviews, podcasts, people to write stories about you. So, I mean, I would say the last 4 or 5 months, this has been basically a full-time job for me.
But promoting this book,
the new one, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you consider that a compromise? Is not the right word, but I mean, you're an artist, really, and this is kind of workman's stuff, but having to promote it. Did you feel? I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. I think you know what I'm asking you.
I became a writer so that I wouldn't have to do all this other stuff.
Right.
But then then you realize that if you don't promote it, nobody else will. And, you'll sell 14 copies to your friends and relatives and nobody else will ever hear of it. So, I mean, I have sent out hundreds and hundreds of emails introducing myself, pitching a story about me, a review of the book, and this becomes a very creative endeavor in its own way. And as someone who's been an entrepreneur my whole life, I mean, that part of it has some attraction. You have to figure out how, who could I get to be interested? And I've found, I do a lot of presentations for genealogical societies because the book is based in DNA testing. And that's become a great audience that they never would have found this book. But I found them and said, if you have a speaker series, I'd be happy to do a half-hour Zoom call with your members and a Q&A. And these are the types of things you do. I wrote to all the Jewish organizations I could find, all the Irish organizations I could find. I mean, anybody who might have a sort of special interest in part of the subject matter who would be a potential reader, and you try to get people to cover you on their radio show. Or, I mean, I've done Zooms with book groups of 8 people who agreed to read the book if I would come and talk to them. So that's what you do now as a writer, and you try to find the time to go back and write something else.
But did you send it to Oprah?
I did not send it to Oprah. Okay. I mean, I did send it to a few celebrities, but the layers of protection around someone like that are so unbelievable. Like, I was trying to get the book in the hands of Bill Murray because
you have a connection there.
It's golf. It's Irish brothers.
Hold on a minute. I can be a facilitator here. You know that Tom Coyne is close friends with Bill Murray and the Murray brothers. Did you know that?
I did not know
He
that.
actually arranged he arranged a trip just for the last year, a golf trip just for the Murray family,
Really?
including Bill and his. Yeah. So call Tom, say, hey Tom, I want Bill to read my book. He'll do it.
Yeah.
It's
worth a
I tell you
try.
what, you know what? I'll do it for you. I'll do it for you because then you won't feel like you're
That would be
groveling
even
for a
better.
competitor.
Because here's what I did.
Which
I tried to find his agent. You can't, so I got his agent.
he has no phone number.
He has no phone number.
Yeah.
So what I did was I know where he lives, and I read some stories about him, and I knew a couple of places that he went, like a bookstore that he goes to, a restaurant, and I just sent copies to all these places. Yep, I sent copies to all these places saying, "Would you just pass this along?" And I don't. I mean, obviously, I want something from him, but I'm not going to press him. I just wanted the opportunity for him to read it and see if he read it and thought that this was something worth pursuing, he would reach out to me and say, I'd like to pass it along to so-and-so who might want to make a movie out of it. Or, a writer like me needs one lightning strike. And so you try to find that lightning strike. And for me, someone like him, and if he read it and he sent me a note and he said, this was fun, thanks for sending, that would be all I expected. Or even if he didn't write a note, but somehow he got the book and he read it so that I knew that at least this opportunity had been opened. And, maybe I also tried to reach the filmmaker Edward Burns, who writes a lot about Long Island, and his movies are all about Long Island. And he grew up in the town that I grew up in. You cannot reach these people.
That's why I asked you about Oprah, because I believe that the lightning strike can be a pivotal event in any kind of artist's life. That somebody notorious or respected says, "Hey, this is great," and then all the people in the world say, "Hey, I'm gonna see what he's talking about." I promise you, because Coyne owes me a favor. I'm gonna make him get in touch with Bill Murray. And which one do you want to read? Both of them?
The first one.
Okay.
Mr. Wisdom. Yeah.
Okay.
And
I promise you.
Coyne kind of owes me a favor too, because I brought him in.
He didn't come to your reading first.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, you brought him in on a podcast?
Yeah, that I was doing a podcast. I'm trying to remember which one it was. I think it was with Irish Tourism.
Okay.
And they're friends of mine, and they've been very generous to me over the years. And I was going to do a reading for them, and I said, I could bring another writer or two if you want. I said, I don't know Tom Coyne, but I'll reach out to him because I know he writes about Ireland a lot. Mm-hmm. So I brought him on this podcast. That's how we know each other. Okay. So, I mean, he doesn't really owe me a favor, but if he wanted to do something nice for me,
well, you know what, he owes me two favors. Here's how I met Tom Coyne. I was in a wedding in upstate New York. I saw a course called Scotland, and I bought it. And I happen to wear a kilt on occasion because my ancestry goes back there. And I look at the cover, and in Highland dress you wear the hose, and you wear flashes, which are like little pieces of cloth, in the little thing that holds up your sock. And I look at the cover, and he has flashes on both sides of the leg, inside and outside. So he gets 4 flashes. So I wrote him an email. I said, Mr. Coyne, I don't know if you plan to sell this book in Scotland, but I will tell you that the people who look at the cover will be so upset they won't read the fucking book. And so the artist changed it. I said, take the inside flashes off because I don't belong there, because it was a kilt violation. So anyway, so he never thanked me for that. So he owes me for that. And I promise I will put a gun to his head, whether or not he.
Well, if you just ask him to get the book in Bill's hands, and he doesn't have to do anything else, I won't follow up. And if Bill likes it, Bill will be Bill and do something. And if he doesn't like it or he doesn't read it, at least it got where it was going. So that's the kind of stuff that you do. You try to be clever, and you try to put it in the right place, and you hope that one lightning strike takes this from a book that's sold maybe, I don't know, 1,000 or 1,200 copies to one that sells you know, Club
1,500.
Novelist. 1,500, exactly. That would be, yeah, that'd be a 20% bump. That'd be huge.
I promise to do that for you. Here's my question. Does a writer go through like postpartum when he finishes a book, he or she finishes a book, that they've finished it and it's like, oh man, it's all over. What do I do now other than promote the books?
Well,
it's like having a baby.
It's more like prepartum.
Okay.
Which is to say, so I probably wrote 12 or 15 drafts of these books. Those are full drafts. They're 60,000, 65,000 words each. And I wrote each one of them probably 12 times. Whoa. And I'm talking about full rewrites. And by the time you get to the 10th or the 11th, now it's painful. You've been over it. You've done 90% of the work, but to take it that next 10% to really get it finished is grueling. It's a grind. And that's the hardest part. And then when you finish, I mean, the sense of relief and satisfaction is like nothing else I've ever done. And I mean, when I found out it was going to be published, that was the greatest moment I can remember in a long time, other than getting married, just in case my wife is listening. I'm
sure she's a big follower of Golf. Podcast.
Yeah. So so the challenge and the pain is somewhere there towards the end, where there's more work, but you've been through it so many times that you really, it's hard to push yourself that last mile.
Okay. Now, writing your next book, okay, so you've got Mr. Wizard. How do you know, because you're out promoting that, how do you know it's time, or do you start something in the back of your head start saying, I better get going on creating something new?
Well, I had a new book that I was working on. That's something that I'd had in mind for a long time. And I started working on that, and it didn't take. And, people had asked me, well, are we going to hear any more about the brothers? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I don't think this story is finished. And so if I had been, let's say, a much younger writer, let's say I wrote this in my 20s, and I wasn't in such a, you get to be 60 and you're going to publish your first novel. It's like, you got to get going, right? I mean, the day is getting short. So I reached a point where I felt like it was done. But if I had been younger, I might have said, this isn't really done. And so I suspect maybe the two books would have been one book, and it would have taken 4 years to write. But I was eager to get something published. And so it seemed like a good stopping point. And I didn't know for a fact that there was going to be more. But when I wrote the sequel, I realized that a better or more experienced writer might have combined the two into one book.
Okay. Did you kill off any of the brothers? Will there be a third book? Or
I think there is going to be a third book, but I need to wait for them to get a little older.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can't you just make them older?
I could.
For living,
I want it to be more organic than that. I have an idea for a third one, which would be the last one, but I've got something else that I'm already working on that's completely unrelated.
Okay. Do you know the demographics of the people who buy and read your book, these two books? I mean, who would that be?
The demographic would be people who know me. No, that's not
a serious question. Yeah.
Not entirely true. I mean, I would say it tends to be, people our age. Let's say people in their 50s.
In the 40s, yeah.
Yeah, even 40s. I mean, there's a lot of, well, you look like a much younger man than I am.
I'm older than you are.
Are you? Well,
I am.
Maybe
I took a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll in high school, so that's.
You must have a good internet filter. I need to get one. I think there are so many cultural references in the book to things that happened in our lifetime growing up. References to board games that we played that kids today might never have heard of, or movies and music that was of a very specific time. So I think it tends to be people who are in my age group that read the book.
Yeah. Do people read anymore? Is the total number of people who buy fiction going down as we die off?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I would assume the answer is yes. And anecdotally, like, I did a reading back in New York back in June, and someone I knew from childhood came to the reading, and he said, "I'm going to buy your book, but I'm not going to read it." I'm like,
at least he was honest about it, right?
okay. I said, "Well, why aren't you going to read it?" He said, "I don't read books." I'm like, what?
It was charity.
How could someone not read books? This is like, I would spend my whole day reading books if I could. The idea that someone who was a college graduate, intelligent, successful, doesn't read books? What? That sounded so crazy to me.
He probably voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah, but this is something I hear more and more, that people don't read books. And yes, you would expect that in certain demographics, right? But
right. I have a few more.
I found it shocking, and that that would be a whole nother direction.
Yes, we shouldn't go there, because
all
my many Trump listeners will immediately jump off this podcast.
That's right.
At any rate, I have a few more questions, and because I'm killing your whole day here.
So I have another, say, 20 minutes.
Okay. You're married. Do you have kids?
Yeah. No kids.
That's how you can be a writer.
It helps.
It really does.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really does. Okay. Do you have an opinion on the LIV tour? And I know this is kind of a stock question these days, but I'm just curious to.
Well, I have an answer you haven't heard yet.
Okay.
I hate everyone involved on both sides.
Okay.
There are no good guys in this argument.
Yeah.
There is no one worth siding with. I mean, the PGA Tour was a strong man, an evil dictator for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
The people who came along to unseat them are like the only people who should not have been involved in this at all. Like,
evil enough.
Anybody else would have been okay. It was kind of like, I mean, you were going politics a minute ago. It was kind of like when the Democrats ran Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Like, anybody else could have won. I mean, anybody.
That's right.
But they picked the single worst prospect to take on this evil empire, and it failed. And so the LIV Tour, I mean, the money should really not even be anything we're discussing. The only thing we should be discussing is these people killed a journalist, and that should not be
others. Countless others whose names we do not know, right? And we'll never know.
Right. That shouldn't be something that we have to like debate about whether that's okay or not.
Yeah.
So, and the fact that it's rich people fighting against other rich people for even more money, like, do we really need that? I mean, I don't really care about either tour at all. The only thing that would trouble me is that, if it undermines the majors, which have been a tradition in sports for so many decades and centuries. And, the idea that some people might or might not be allowed to compete in them because, I don't know. The whole thing is just a mess, and I don't like anyone.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad I asked. I have a golf question at the end there, just to make sure that this is a golf podcast. So what questions have I not asked you that you would like to answer, or a point you'd like to make? You were on a soapbox earlier on. You kind of surprised me at the beginning there, I asked you about your background. You went into this rant about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a cranky old man, and I apologize for that.
That's why I like you, actually. You should be a Scot. You'd fit right in.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, the impetus for the book was the fact that when I was 50, my mother made reference to my Scottish heritage.
Oh, that's right. I read that somewhere.
Something that I had never heard anyone mention ever. And at 50 years old, I took a DNA test. And it turns out my great-grandfather was Scottish, which means I'm 12%.
Wow. Congratulations.
So, thank you.
That's great. And that's why you're a crank. I mean, my grandparents, they were the biggest cranks in the world. I couldn't understand what they were saying because they were from Aberdeen, but
Yeah.
but they're sweetly cranky. I mean,
Yeah, I
cranky.
mean, I'm cranky with good intentions. I like
That's
to
right.
think.
That's
But I mean, that's the other thing. The other thing about golf, and I was just traveling with a group of journalists in Ireland, and we encountered a golf course that I thought was one of the worst golf courses I had encountered, maybe ever. And everybody was talking it up about how great it was
you're not
because
going to mention it, are you? You're not going to mention it. All right.
I could mention it. That was going to be part of my point is everybody's so afraid of being political and expressing the wrong opinion. Like, I don't give a shit anymore, right? I mean, I am who I am. I know who I am. On a thing like this, somebody hosts you, right? And you go out of your way to try to say nice things because someone's gone to the trouble of hosting you. But where that leads is a golf course that was virtually unplayable is now ranked 55th in the world.
Whoa.
I think number 3 in Ireland. And everybody is required to, on the record, to say all these great things about it when, I think a lot of the other journalists on this trip tended to agree that this was impossibly difficult and ridiculous and, like, just shouldn't have been built in the way it was built, but they're all in the business, and so they have to say nice things anyway.
It wasn't the European club, was it?
No, it wasn't the European club.
Because I really enjoyed it, and I got to meet.
I like the European club.
I got to meet Pat Ruddy, and he's a real character.
Yeah, I met him there as well. He was tending bar in the clubhouse.
Yeah,
the day we were there.
I loved him. I have a picture of him sticking his cane in my ear. I'll send it to you. So,
at any rate, what this gets at is that we cannot trust any of these ratings panels, any of these numbers. It's all political. People buy the influence to get on these lists. People who are raters are not reliable sources in many cases, not in all cases, to be reviewing these courses and giving them a rating. I mean, this whole thing is a scam pulled over the eyes of golfers who rely on certain magazines or certain lists or certain panels to tell them where they should be playing. And
so you saved this scandalous expose to the very end. I'm going to have to edit this and put it right up front or in the middle.
The whole thing out. I'll deny saying any of it.
Oh yeah, because I don't have your. Good.
I just think it's the same with the LIV Golf thing. Like, I think everybody is worried about expressing their opinion, and now now you're really going to get me off on a tear. We're at a time in the world where people can't express their opinions because someone will be insulted or offended no matter what you say. And if you say something different, someone else will be offended. But nobody can really, so people are becoming afraid to express what their real opinions are, and they water everything down so as not to hurt anyone's feelings. And the fact is, if someone builds a terrible golf course, we should all be able to say that's a terrible golf course, even though somebody named it 55th in the world.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you, just to separate myself from the pack who are afraid to express themselves, I live about 10 minutes from Bedminster. And every time I drive by the opening gate, I yell an obscenity. And I'm sure they have my license plate. I'm sure they have me on some kind of video. But it makes me feel good just to yell.
Yeah, it makes me feel good knowing that you're doing that.
Okay, it's my public service. So where should people, this is time for your plug, Jeff. So where should people learn more about your books, buy your books, promote your books, whatever?
So the clearinghouse for all of this would be my website, jeffwallach.com.
Okay.
And rather than give you another rant about the publishing business, I'll just say books like this are generally not available in bookstores because of the economics of book selling. But you could go to a bookstore and ask them to order it. So if you have, and I encourage people to buy their books from small independent bookstores whenever possible, because if we don't support them, they won't be around anymore. And I sell a lot of books on Amazon. People can buy it there, and that's easy, and I get it. And Amazon is good for writers, but so are independent bookstores where you can actually go and wander an aisle and accidentally come upon a book that you might not have otherwise ever seen. So jeffwallach.com, and there's a link there to my publisher, or they could get it on Amazon, or they can buy them from their independent bookstores by asking them to be ordered.
Okay. This has been great, Jeff. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, I hope I've asked you some questions that you didn't get asked on any other podcast.
Absolutely.
And I promise I'll do the Bill Murray thing. Whether or not I'm successful is another matter, but I promise.
Yeah, well, let me know what our mutual friend says.
Okay, I will do that.
All right. A pleasure talking with you, Gordon. Thanks so much.
Nice to meet you.
Cheers.